But here's an article here that appeared in the paper, and it shows you how nothing is ever as it seems to be. We know this carbon tax thing is a must-be. I mean, Lord Rothschild tried to introduce it in 2002. He eventually did reintroduce it again in 2010. But in 2002, he had the bag sewn up, basically, that the cash would come through his family private bank in Switzerland. And Al Gore, of course, was rampaging across the world on, again, Rothschild's and Rockefeller's behalf, pushing the same scams. A must-be thing, in other words. I call it must-be's. Nothing's going to stop it. Doesn't matter if you get snow all summer long. They'll keep saying climate change or global warming. That's been dropped for climate change, which means the weather. The weather is always changing. That's what seasons are all about. But it's a nice way to obfuscate reality for the public. They can't think through things. And what they really mean by this is there's too many people. It's man-made global warming and man-made climate change. This is what they're really getting at. And of course their answer supposedly is to tax you into utter poverty. Well, they fatten themselves at the top again. And that's really what it's about, a planned society living in third world poverty across the world. Much easier to bring the populations down that way too, and manage them as they simply go down the tubes. So here's an article here. Lobbyists who created the ClimateGate scandal and academics are funded by the taxpayers and the BBC. This is how they work things out at the higher levels. They don't spend their own cash. This is a little-known not-for-profit company works behind the scenes at international conferences to further its aims. One of its key supporters headed the official investigation into the so-called ClimateGate emails. I mentioned that at the time. He also worked for the Royal Society, producing a report which cleared experts of deliberately attempting to skew, meaning falsify scientific results, to confirm that global warming was a real threat. And I mentioned that at the time I read the article and says, look who they've sent after to investigate. He's one of them. Anyway, another scientific expert linked to the group came forward to praise a second independent investigation, the ClimateGate affair, which also exonerated researchers, set up with the backing of Tony Blair, then the Prime Minister, and run by a group of British members of Parliament and peers. That's the guys that get all the peer group, as I say. The organization Globe International, it's called, started life as an all-party group based in the House of Commons. So you think it's all for the people. No, they have private companies working in there too, run by you. You're paying for them all. It's now run as an international climate change lobbying group, flying its supporters and expert club class to international summits to push its agenda. Last year it said it spent around £500,000 flying its supporters to these meetings. That was Copenhagen and so on. It's also paid out at least £75,000 on travel for prominent UK politicians, including for its former presidents, Elliot Morley, the ex-Labour Environment Minister who now faces jail for expenses fraud, and Stephen Byers, the former Labour Cabinet Minister who was suspended from the Commons after he was filmed describing himself a cab for hire when offering to lobby his parliamentary contacts for cash. They're all crooks, you see. That's who you pick for these things. Now, Globe is planning a mass lobby of the United Nations Rio 2012 summit in Brazil, where the world leaders will discuss climate change by holding a world summit of legislators in the city to coincide with the event. Now, for those who don't know it, the first Rio summit was headed by Maurice Strong, who is a Rockefeller frontman for the big organization above. Rockefeller picked him up very young and basically made him a CEO of oil fields and everything else to see how the real world worked and the real economies worked the world. And then he worked as a technocrat for Rockefeller and the world's group that owns the planet. He even was set up in China to help the World Trade Organization use our tax money to get the factories over to China. So they based him in China for a while. Lovely accommodation he had. And a public broadcasting program that was on one rainy Sunday a few years back, they showed him in Beijing, and he was visiting the graveyard of one of his relatives. I don't know if it was a cousin or an aunt, but it said that she was one of the main confidants and advisors for Mao Zedong. So you're talking about people who have long historical backgrounds in revolution for the big world system that's still on the go today. Quite amazing how it all goes. But anyway, the first Rio summit gave animals rights and trees rights and everything else rights. The one thing they didn't give rights were humanity. But what they did discuss too was corridors for humans to live in and habitats, and the corridors for animals. And any human straying over into the animal section was fair game to be eaten, and it was just too bad, so sad, and all the rest of it. And of course, they get masses of funding from your tax money across the planet, and to put you basically into a kind of mud hut village, I call them, because that's what they'd like to put you in down the road. Probably will too, because we won't afford anything else with all the taxes. Anyway, the next one is 2012 summit, something you gotta watch, because you will not believe the documentation that will come out of this. And of course, all they do is have their big fancy meals there, stuff themselves, do a bit of quantitative easing off their chairs, and sign the papers that they've been working on for years and years. That's what these meetings are really all about. Anyway, back to this article, and it says here, next week the group's current president, Lord Deben, the former Tory cabinet minister, John Goomer, is due to launch a major report on climate change policy alongside Chris Huhne, the energy secretary. The Globe has also recently held behind closed doors meetings with William Hague, the foreign secretary, and other senior coalition ministers. So here this is a private company having secret meetings with your politicians that you're paying for, supposedly, to represent you. What a joke, anyway. It's never been that way. It says last year, 2 prominent experts linked to Globe were drawn into the controversy over emails leaked from the University of East Anglia's Climate Research Unit. Lord Oxborough, the organisation's director, was called in to head an internal inquiry into the leaked emails, which included one infamous message referring to a trick to hide the decline in global temperatures, because it's been falling for years, actually. The Peers investigation cleared the scientists of malpractice, but critics claimed the report was a whitewash, and Lord Oxborough also feared to declare his involvement with Globe, this private corporation, before he began his investigation. So they get their own boys to investigate themselves and to clear them, and so on. And it also says, meanwhile, Bob Ward from the Grantham Institute, which works alongside Globe, praised a second inquiry by former civil servant Muir Russell, which also cleared the climate researchers. And Muir Russell also is a member of the Royal Societies, who's all for the climate change and blame the people stuff. So Globe's international work is paid for with donations from multi-millionaire backers and through partnerships with other environmental groups. Globe also confirmed last night it received direct funding from the Department of Energy and the Department of International Development, including a grant of £91,240 provided by a DFID since the coalition came to power last year. So they're using your tax money as well. And for the big corporations like IBM and so on that back them, because they're all on board together, folks, that's just a tax write-off for them anyway. This is more cash from the DFID is filtered through the ComPlus Alliance, which is a sustainable development communications alliance, they call it, of broadcasters based in Costa Rica, which is also supported by the BBC World Service Trust, the corporation's independent charity. And of course they get their big cash from the taxpayers as well. So it's all sewn up, folks. Back with more after this break. Hi, we're back, and we're cutting through the matrix, reading an article about one of the big organizations that helps working behind the scenes to get this global strategy on carbon taxes and all that through on the public. Not only carbon taxes, but literally design a new way for you to live and get the governments to pass laws to make you and force you to comply with them too. That's how the world is really run. But it said here in the same article here, as say the BBC's World Service Trust, the corporation's independent charity, also gives this organization cash. It says ComPlus, which was awarded the DFID cash last year and in 2006, says it's an ongoing relationship with Globe. That's nice that way they put it. I hope they're proactive. Helping it run shadow negotiation teams at international summits of world leaders. What's a shadow negotiation team? That means the ones that don't want to get their names in the limelight, folks, but they have more power than anybody else. A spokeswoman for ComPlus said the BBC is a founding member, not a funding member. They can make in-kind contributions like organising events, supporting logistics and sharing content. In other words, they fund them by paying for this rather than direct contributions. It's great how they got it all figured out, eh? She added that ComPlus did not fund Globe, but worked with them on convergent objectives, the same strategy to bring us into mud huts. Last night, a DFID spokesman confirmed the department had given ComPlus £250,000 in total to provide research, advocacy and communications work. That means propaganda on the public for communications work on the impact of climate change. The spokesman said that these contributions were awarded under the previous government. The current government has not given them any funding, and that will be a lie too. You'll find it will be continuous, and we'll find out about that next year, or maybe after the next Rio Summit. The BBC's trust money is drawn from the £15.2 million a year it gets from the Foreign Office. That's the British Department of the Foreign Office, and the DFID, and £800,000 from licence payers, because you have to pay a licence to the government for the BBC to watch their rotten indoctrination shows that they have on there. The BBC charity failed to respond to questions about its relationship with the project and how much this involvement was costing. I should add the taxpayer. And the Zoological Society of London, the world's famous charity behind London Zoo, also provides Globe with scientific advice, providing high-level input from its top conservationists and zoologists. Globe said it paid ZSL for its expertise. Yeah, sure. And who also funds the Zoological Society of London, and who's the head of that? Another member of the Royal Society. Last night, Globe's General Secretary Adam Matthews says Globe is not a lobbying organisation. No, it's a shadow organisation, eh? Is an international group of legislators. It was set up by the legislators themselves, the guys that get the laws passed. We facilitate them coming together to discuss environmental issues. Our members have multiple views, some quite sceptical, and on some aspects of climate change debate. We're funded by the World Bank. Well, the World Bank also gets funding to them as well. The Economic Union, and that's their big government over there now, the Soviet, international parliaments and governments, including the UK government. The coalition government contributes to our work through DFID. It's just astonishing that the public are kept in utter blind ignorance of how the world really does work. This is only one area. This is one area to do with the environment. Globe International registered as a not-for-profit firm, pays no taxes, under the name the Global Legislators Organisation Limited, and makes minimal disclosures about its finances to Companies House. That's where you have to register it there in Britain. Last year it declared a £500,000 loss, but still managed to fly a number of key supporters to summits and international conferences. It says Barry Gardner, Member of Parliament, is Vice President, former Labour Biodiversity Minister, attending to at least 4 international conferences on Globe's behalf, including a trip to Tokyo, Japan, Seoul and South Korea, costing more than £7,000. Another trip to China cost more than £8,000. Mr. Gardner's daughter is also a member of Globe's full-time staff. That's just coincidence. So it also paid nearly £3,000 to fly Gregory Barker, now Coalition Climate-Change Minister. They're all in the pocket, eh? All these politicians are in the pockets of these private organisations. Eh? So he flew me to Washington, D.C. And then it's a whole list of different people, too, who are also on the pay tab of this private company that gets funded by the taxpayers who know nothing at all about it, that's going to make them live in little mud huts down the road. That's the reality. That's the real world. And none of it's mentioned at voting time by any of these puppets that they put in front of you. Now, there's an article here about billions of dollars sneaks out the door through United Nations committees, and it's from Australia. So sure, this is worldwide, you see. See, the Council on Foreign Relations, that basically runs, it even has foundations, front foundations, they set up to get everybody and all the other corporations and foundations on board with the world agenda, you see. So you've got to take all the countries into consideration here, because whatever happens in one is happening in another at the same time in exactly the same way. Same laws passed too. So billions of dollars sneaks out the door through United Nations committees. There are billions of dollars of money sneaking out the door of Western nations and being used to feed the monster bureaucracy, the UNFCCC and its cohort. In the carbon tax that ate Australia, Tony Cox and David Stockwell point out the Australian contributions fly so under the radar, despite being millions of dollars, that even the Australian government seems to have forgotten they agreed to pay them. See, they're paying the carbon tax. It was passed by that Fabian socialist that took over from the last Fabian socialist as a prime minister. Greg Combet, the minister for climate change, promises every dollar of the carbon tax will be given back to the people. But he's talking about the people across the world, because you see, this is the redistribution of the wealth. And it doesn't go to the people of the world, by the way, or to Africa or anywhere. It goes to their own corporations set up in their other countries. Isn't that wonderful? Democracy is just that we're giving it to people in the Middle East right now, one way or another. Back after this break.